Well, hello, and welcome to the very first full edition of the Kangaroo Leadership Podcast, where we bring you leaders who demonstrate the traits of kangaroos. Kangaroos are unique animals, and I picked kangaroos because leaders always have to be in some sort of forward motion. And so when you look at kangaroos and you ask what leadership traits they have, because kangaroos can only move forward, I've come up with 10 things. So the leaders that we're going to have on our show, and especially the one we're having today, really demonstrate these 10 leadership qualities, and I'm going to share those with you. Adaptability, agility, resilience, empathy, visionary, agility, collaboration, authenticity, continuous learning, and courage. And I said agility twice, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Kangaroos can only move forward, so we must always be moving forward. My company, MaxFabConsulting.com, sponsors the program. That's www.maxfabconsulting.com for leadership training and veteran transition. So check out the website, check out our book, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So today, it's my special honor to have not only a tremendous kangaroo leader, but a friend and someone that I've worked through some adversity with in the leadership world. So today we have John Felton. John Felton will tell you that he is no longer the CEO of Riverstone Health or our public health officer, but he'll always be our public health officer because he's taken us through some pretty austere times. And so John comes with a lot of pedigree, but he went to the University of Puget Sound, graduated with an MBA from the University of Cincinnati, so that makes you a Bearcat.
Yes.
That's pretty cool. And he's got Montana pedigree with a master's in public health from the University of Montana. John grew up in rural Washington State and has a 45-year healthcare journey. And then after college, he pursued a clinical occupational therapy, worked on focused rehabilitation of people. So he's had his hands on people for a long time in a lot of different varieties. He moved into healthcare administration, turned a team around in 1988 at the Drake Center, and John's going to talk to us a little bit more about his travels through this. I'm not going to spoil this. John wrote me a really nice note of all of this stuff, and I'm really going to take John into places that he'll share with us, and it's going to be awesome. So, without further ado, my friend and much respected leader and a kangaroo leader, John Felton. So, welcome to the show, John.
Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you, and I'm glad to have you be first, because when I sat down and I kind of said, we're going to call this Kangaroo Leadership, and it's really based on the fact that kangaroos can only move forward, and so they have to build these traits, these visionary traits and strategy, and really kind of have their way forward figured out. Very few people came to mind, and you were right at the top of the list, so I appreciate that. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You can expand on kind of what I already talked through, and then we'll go from there.
All right. Well, thank you. So yeah, my journey goes way back. My mom went to nursing school when I was 13 years old, and I decided healthcare was going to be for me. I started off as a nurse aide in a nursing home, working second shift while I was going to high school, and then worked all through college. I never anticipated entering leadership as a career. John Lennon once said that life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. And so I had other plans, right? My plans were I was going to practice treating neurologically impaired patients for a while, and then get a doctorate in some sort of neuroscience, neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, and then teach. That was the plan. And that plan didn't exactly work out. My wife and I got married in Alabama. We moved to Cincinnati. I worked at an acute care hospital for a little while, and then I went to work at this place called Drake, which was really kind of a wannabe rehab center. And physical rehab is what I really loved. And the CEO had this plan for turning it into a rehab center. It was largely long-term care at the time. I started there in January of '87. 6 weeks later, our first child was born. So now we've got, all the wonders of a baby and a mortgage and school loans. And 2 weeks after she was born, we were called in as managers into a meeting where we were told that a patient had been murdered. And it was a fairly debilitated patient who was found dead. Autopsy showed that he'd actually been poisoned with cyanide. And to make a really long story fairly short, I did everything I could to get out of there. You know, I wasn't interested in being around some place that could have that kind of trouble. And it turns out that nobody wants to hire somebody from the place that killed ultimately 24 patients. So this person, who was a nursing assistant at the facility, ultimately confessed to killing 24 patients at that facility, 17 patients at the VA in Cincinnati, 9 patients at a hospital in Kentucky, and then he confessed to about 30 non-healthcare murders. Meanwhile, I'm trying like crazy to get out, and the facility is falling around us, falling down around us, and I couldn't get a job. So I think one of my early leadership lessons was, you know, you can make all the plans you want, but you just react to the world you have. And in our world, I had to have a job. And because I was there and I got to know the CEO who ultimately led the turnaround, he gave me my first administrative job. So my first administrative job was helping turn around a facility in the aftermath of a serial killer. Makes interesting bookends with the end of the story being global pandemic. So a lot of things happened in between there. But now as I'm on the back end of my career, I'll be retiring at the end of this year fully. There's some things I want to do. My poor wife will have our 40th anniversary this year, and she has been drug around through serial murder and pandemic and all kinds of stuff. So we're going to definitely spend some time together and travel some. And then I'm going to be like you when I grow up, and I'm going to write a book, a book on leadership. And you know, when you go from a serial murderer to a global pandemic, there's lots of things that happen. There's lots of stories. And a lot of those stories carry good lessons with them. So that's going to be my next adventure. My kids have been after me for years to write a book because they've heard the stories at the dinner table. So now we're going to get there.
That's what happened to me. Somebody finally said, "I'm sick of your stories. Why don't you just write all this stuff down?" So it's great. And I know you're already started on that journey, and we're all going to support you in that. And that's just, I look forward to it because I'm going to learn something. As soon as your book comes out, I'll still learn something as much time as we've spent together. It's great. So John, you heard these traits, these kangaroo traits. You know, there's probably some missing in there that you cherish as a leader, but there's probably quite a few. In fact, I know that there's quite a few that you demonstrate. Is there one in that bunch that just pops out at you that you would say, boy, if I had to cash in all the other stuff, this is the one I'd ride into the...
Yeah, you know, it's a little bit like asking which of your kids is your favorite, right? But I think the one that if I had to pick one, it would have to be resilience. You know, I do a lot of leadership development training, and I usually end those with a slide that says, the most important trait of leadership is blank. And so then I ask the participants, you know, what's your word? What do you put in the blank? And there's lots of good words, right? Honesty, transparency, integrity, all critical components. Then I say, so do you know what my word is? And my word is perseverance. Sometimes leadership is just about pushing the rock up the hill. Now, of course, the art is picking the right rock, right? If you pick the wrong rock, then it doesn't matter how hard you push, you don't really get where you want to go. But I think you just have to be able to believe in what you're doing and just come back day after day and push that rock up the hill. You know, I think back again to the early days of the turnaround in Cincinnati. We ultimately went through that building and threw away every policy and procedure manual, just picked them up and threw them away. And we wrote every policy, every procedure, every form, every process, because they had to be done right. And sometimes that's the rock, right? You just have to decide the most important thing we have to do is figure out how we're going to deliver care. And then you just start at step one and keep going.
Right. So you mentioned perseverance and moving the rock and moving forward. So kangaroos continuously move forward. Mm-hmm. So what do you do when you feel like the weight of the world is against you, right?
Yeah, so I think that's and a lot of the time in COVID. The COVID response was really like that. That was obviously a very difficult time. It was a difficult time for for people trying to deliver care, for people in public health, for the general populace. It affected everybody. I think one of the things that's really important as a leader is you have to have a certain degree of ego strength. And I would differentiate ego strength and egotism. Egotism is it's all about me. Ego strength is the ability to say, I know this is hard, but I believe I'm doing the right thing. And I think during COVID in particular, there were a lot of days where, my email would be full of terrible things and my phone would ring off the hook with people saying terrible things. And at the end of the day, I just had to be able to ask myself the question, did you do the best you could do? And did you do the right thing? I think one of the realities of leadership, and I actually looked this up today. I wouldn't call it research. That might be a little bold, but I was wondering, do kangaroos mate for life? I don't know if you ever asked that question. Turns out they don't. But I think one of the challenges that leaders have is they tend to get wedded to their bad decisions. And that's where it gets to be more in that egotism. I made this decision, therefore I'm going to stick to it no matter what. Nobody's perfect. Heaven knows I've made more than my share of mistakes. But I think as a leader, you have to be able to step back and say, that was not the right way to go. And when you do that, you're still moving forward. It's not like you've gone to full retreat. But that's when you have to take a step to the side and say, I need another path forward. So I think not getting wedded to your bad decisions and learn from those, that continuous learning idea. So here's the reality of human behavior. We don't learn from our successes, right? People who, if you do something well, you're going to do it again. You're going to do the same thing over and over. If you do something poorly, your choice is to either just walk away from it and say, I can't do that, or you learn from that experience and figure out a new way to do it that's better. And I think good leaders are willing to say, yeah, that was a bad idea. I'm going to learn from it. I'm probably not going to do that one again. And then you move forward. So I think the idea of the kangaroo moving forward is important. I don't think that kangaroo moves always at the same pace forward. You sometimes have to go sideways a little bit and change direction a bit. But I think you have to have that sense of I'm going to do the best I can do, and if it doesn't work, I'll do something different. And that's what really can keep an organization moving.
In my book, I write about the right side is often the hard side or the lonely side. So when you're standing, especially if you've done your research, good leaders, they make sure that, they don't make assumptions. They don't just do things to be doing things. I mean, they gather some data. They have to have some foundation to go off of. Sometimes that's experience. And your experience can drive you to a place where everybody in the room is against you. It's just counterintuitive. They don't want to do it. It's a scary place. You're taking them down some hard road. And so it can be lonely, but I won't say that you're alone. So talk about, you and I have talked a lot about your two big challenges. One is 24 people being killed in your facility, and the other one is COVID, leading through COVID, especially in Montana, right? Because basically you were the public health officer in charge of the largest population center in the whole state. So it wasn't uncommon, and I know this, it wasn't uncommon for you to be laying on your couch at the end of a 16-hour day with your eyes half closed and the governor calls, right? And then you got to be on your game to kind of work through that. And even after those phone calls, you can feel lonely. So what do leaders, because leadership is lonely anyway, right? Everybody's got an opinion until it's their turn to be the guy or the gal that has to make the decision. And then it gets, then it gets real. So tell me or tell us how not to be lonely. What does your inner circle look like? What do you do?
Yeah, there is that old saying that it's lonely at the top. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. To me, the biggest reason is that when you're in the top position, whether you call that a CEO or an executive director or whatever that person is, you're the only one that has the entire worldview of what's going on. I often use the analogy of in a hospital. If I'm a floor nurse, I'm in charge of my 4 or 5 patients for 8 hours. If I'm a charge nurse, I'm in charge of all the patients on that unit for 8 hours. If I'm a nurse manager, I am responsible for all the patients on that unit 24 hours a day. If I'm a chief nursing officer or director of nursing, I'm responsible for all the patients and all the units 24 hours a day. But if I'm the CEO, I'm in charge of all that, plus the surgery, plus the doctors, plus the community relations and all that. So the worldview is just different. So one of the things that I found is I have a lot of friends and colleagues who are in completely different fields and industries. I look for people who have a similar worldview, who in terms of, I'm pretty good friends with bank presidents or social service agency CEOs. It doesn't have to be out of your same work group. It really is people who face the same type of worldview. So I think that's important. I think the other piece that you sort of alluded to is I've often said that the right thing and the easy thing are rarely the same thing. And that's where that ego strength comes in. You've got to be willing to say, this is the right thing to do. The COVID world is rife with that. I think people tend to forget that most of the decisions, all of the decisions early in COVID, and most of them for the whole time, were really made with very limited information. It was a rapidly evolving situation. This is a virus that nobody had encountered. We didn't know if it was going to kill everybody it came in contact with, or if it was going to give you the sniffles. Nobody knew. And it took experience to find that. And I remember one of the conversations I had with a group of physicians early on about what decisions I would make, because better or worse, the law gives the health officer the authority to make these decisions. And I remember making this comment, which was, no matter what I do, I'm going to get pilloried for it. I understand that. That's kind of what you sign up for. If I'm going to get beat up for something, I would rather get beat up for being too careful than not careful enough. So think of the extremes. If we over-respond to the pandemic, and people get mad because there's economic disruption, there is the masking question, there's what happens with schools, all those sorts of things. Those are all bad, right? No one's saying that those are great options. But if my choice is to get beat up for that, when it turns out, well, maybe it wasn't all that bad, or we buried 5,000 kids in the last week, I'm going to take the first one. And one of the fascinating things I saw through COVID was, a lot of the decisions were coming out of the governor's office because they were statewide decisions, and he always very carefully said, and local public health will take care of implementing all this. And my email, I think everyone in the county had my email address. Half of them had my cell phone number. But my email would change within an hour. And it was these really extreme changes. Like if the governor added more restrictions, I'd get these messages. And I'm really not exaggerating. You're un-American, you hate business, you want people to starve, you want businesses to close, you want the government to run everything. And I'd get inundated with these. If the governor would relax restrictions, immediately my email would change to, you don't care about kids who are at risk, you don't care about old people, you hope grandma dies. It was just this dramatic swing. And those of us who were charged with making decisions had to do so in that environment. And again, I think you do the best you can do, and accept that you're not going to be right all the time. And if you were wrong, you do better next time.
Was there, besides the mass murder, was there anything in your career or in your development, right, as a leader, was there anything in there that you would see as a sentinel moment that prepared you for COVID?
I think going through the serial killer experience, my wife has often said she thinks that the reason that I went through that experience and that we moved to Montana was to be ready for this, ready for the pandemic response. But when you're in a situation that is that bad, what you learn is any action is better than no action. And it kind of comes down to Newton's concepts of motion, right? So a body at rest will remain at rest, and a body in motion will remain in motion. It's far easier to change the course of something moving than to start it from a dead stop. And when we were going through excuse me, when we were going through COVID, there were lots of experts, at least so-called experts. I mean, I had no idea there were as many virologists, immunologists, and epidemiologists in Billings as we found out there were, because they all wrote me emails. But at some point, you can get so wrapped up in trying to cover all the bases and figure out everyone's story that you get frozen. And I think the biggest lesson is, and this kind of comes back to the kangaroo idea, you got to do something. So I mean, we could have talked about, masking and not masking and keeping schools open and closing schools for months, and at that point it would have been too late. Again, we can change what we're doing, but people gain confidence. They may not be happy, but they gain confidence, I think, from seeing actions being taken. Sitting around doing nothing doesn't build much confidence among the populace.
For those of you who don't know, I did a 30-year military career, so you'll hear me talk a lot about my military time. But so one of my favorite generals that I worked with was a flyer, he was an aviator. And to your point, he would say, Chief, he says, when you're flying along in an airplane, if a wing catches on fire, he goes, you got a lot of options. He goes, you got checklists, you got experience, you got a co-pilot, you got buzzers, you got bells, you got whistles, handles you can pull. And he said, and out of all of that, one of the options is to do nothing. Mm-hmm. And so one of the kangaroo traits, which none of the traits are in order of importance, one of the kangaroo traits is courage. And I think, when I look at you and watched, I was fairly close to you while we were going through COVID, and I watched what you were doing. A lot of times, even if I wasn't even completely aligned with how you were making decisions, again, not having the full picture, a lot of times I'd say, that's really courageous, because I knew what lion, it didn't matter. You had to pick which lion was the least hungry, I guess, to go into
right.
the den, right? Because you were going into the den. There was no place that was empty of the lion. So when you look at the trait of courage with kangaroos, and I think that kangaroos are identified as being courageous because of the way they move and because of their environment, they're always going into an unknown space. And so if you look at the Johari's window of how we kind of work through things in life, the unknown space is the scary place that's full of pain and fear, but it's the growth space. Right? It's the gosh, I don't know what's in there. Tell me what's in there. And whoever you're asking, whatever expert goes, well, I don't know either. When this was COVID, right?
That's exactly right.
And so talk about that a little bit, about maybe a different experience other than COVID, as you were developing as a leader, where you found you overcame, or at least came to grips with, the natural tendency of fear and pain. So fear and pain, you hear people say it all the time. Ooh, that looks painful. Or I'd be scared to death to do that, which means they'll never do it. They'll never climb a mountain. They'll never ride a motorcycle, whatever those things are. In leadership, you're that unknown space is always sitting there. And sometimes that's where you have to go. So give us an example, or at least talk about it, because this is personal growth. And we're gonna talk in a minute about, kind of what your philosophy is for young leaders coming into these kind of positions. So.
Yeah, so I had an experience in my first CEO job where there was a structural issue in the organization that was, let's just say, it pushed the limits of what could legally be done. And it had been there for a long time. It had been in place. A lot of people got a lot of secondary gain from that particular structure. And I figured out within a few months of going to work there that this was unworkable. And I did my research. I made sure that I had it right. I went to the leadership of the board of the organization and said, I laid it out for them, like, this is why this is wrong. And they agreed. Unfortunately, life is often about whose ox is being gored. And in this particular case, there were some physicians whose oxes were being gored. The fastest way for a healthcare executive to lose their job is to get sideways with the medical staff. And I knew that. I mean, I was new at this job, but I knew that was a possibility. I also knew that that what was going on in the organization, if it wasn't fixed, would be would ultimately be a bigger problem than it was. And so I fought that through. Ended up going through a very extensive review process between the board and the medical staff and the whole staff. And in the end, it came out that it was the right thing to do. But it does take courage to do the right thing. I'll devolve back to a Drake story. So Drake had some hospital beds, and they were actually long-term hospital beds. And I was always a little confused. People thought those were rehab hospital beds, which is a different designation, and they weren't. And I always wondered why it was that nobody complained about the fact that we had these patients who were clearly not hospital-level rehab patients. And then we found out. And what was going on, and had been going on for who knows how long, was that the way the billing forms were being filled out was untrue. And we figured that out. And we went to our CEO, who's the greatest mentor I've ever known. And he said, "What do you think we should do?" And I said, "We need to call the government and self-report. We need to tell them what we found." So he agreed. So we called the government. It was a federal issue. Went through the whole story. The person that was responsible for that we had terminated and sent on their way. And at the end of it, this could have been a ginormous issue. And at the end of it, there was this little moment of silence, and then the federal official said, "So you're the new leadership?" We said, "Yeah." "You found this thing?" "Yeah." "It was there when you got there?" "Yes." "You fired the person who's doing it?" "Yes." There's a couple of moments, and he said, "Have a nice day," and he hung up the phone. And that could have been really bad. It was like go to jail type of bad stuff. But we did the right thing. We courageously stood up and said, we found it, we fixed it, but we need to report because that's the honest thing to do. It could have gone badly. We happened to have gotten someone on the phone who recognized that it was a difficult situation and we were the new people in town trying to do the right thing. And fortunately, he said, "Have a nice day," and hung up the phone.
So talk more about being the new person, and this goes along with courage, being the new person in town, coming to some place with experience, right? And you've done this as you've moved. And you come to some place with experience, and all anybody really knows about you is where you came from and that you're new. And so there's a speed limit to, in the military, we used to say even up to 6 months, don't move too many chess pieces, because you can really scatter things. So what advice, along those lines, what advice do you give a new leader? And I use the word new, the descriptive is for somebody that's in a new position. You could have been a CEO 9 times. You can be a very seasoned CEO, but you still are new when you go to a new organization, when you're the new guy and everybody's looking at you. I've been that guy.
Yep.
And one of the phenomenons that I had some people when I went into my first command job, my first command billet. I had a really wise chief come to me and he said, he goes, "Your first 2 weeks, you're going to hear this, 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 and this." He gave me a list, right? Mm-hmm. He goes, "You're going to hear these things." He goes, "The reason that you're going to hear these things is because for the last 2 years, we've been telling people, no, they can't do those things, but you're the new guy. And they're going to run them back through you, hoping that you've got a different viewpoint to override the rest of us." So I really appreciated that. That was a mountain or a phenomenon that I didn't have to experience in the hard way because it happened. It happened. So,
yep.
So where would you take the new leader? There's no magic checklist, obviously, and every organization's different. But
so I think even in a situation like the Cincinnati situation and the serial killer, you can't go in with the assumption that everyone's bad and you're the savior. I'm not a person who believes that people, and I use this story in talking to healthcare leaders. I don't think there's very many people who wake up in the morning and yawn and stretch and say, "Man, I hope I can mess things up today. And if I can hurt a patient, holy cow, that's just the icing on the cake." People don't do that. People get up and go to work and they want to do the right things. We know the biggest reason that people fail is the systems around them. Give me a choice of a bad system and good people or a good system and acceptable people, and I'll take the latter every time. The systems are what drive us. So I think you have to go in with the belief that the people who are there are trying to do the right thing. That may be a little Pollyannish, but I think it's true. I think most people want to do a good job. I think you don't go in with this sense of, I'm going to make lots of changes. A very common new CEO approach is, I'm going to bring in my own people. Well, I think that's not a very good approach, because the first thing you do is alienate everyone who already works there. And then they sit down waiting to be, who's next. But again, if you start with that premise that people are basically good and they're going to try and do the right thing, but then you have to be honest about those that aren't doing the right thing or aren't doing well, and you make your changes slowly and carefully. As new leaders come into an organization, people are nervous anyway. There's a model that I really like. It's a transition model, and it's got these 3 stages of transition. And transition is really about the emotional response to change, not the change itself, but the emotional response to it. And the second phase of this is called the neutral zone. And it's kind of what we were talking about earlier. The neutral zone is that time simultaneously of greatest opportunity and greatest fear. And it's for the same reason. There's no rules, right? Let's use a new CEO. The old CEO is gone, so those rules don't apply. The new CEO is too new to have rules, so there's no rules there. So what do you do? And what rules really do, from a human perspective, is they tell us what our limits are, right? You can do this much, but you can't do any more. The analogy that I like to use is the neutral zone is like a blind guy walking on a cliff. You know that there's an edge there, but the only way you really find it is you fall off, right? So what are your choices? Your choices are to walk around and find out when you fall off, hope you survive the fall, or you just hunker down and sit, right? If I know I'm on solid ground right now, if I hunker down right here, I won't fall. Nothing will change either. So I think you share with people what you think is important. So for me, what I think is important is that belief that people want to do good. I think it's important to recognize the work that people do, and don't assume you know it. I mean, I've been fortunate in my 2 CEO roles. One was in radiation therapy that I knew nothing about, and the other was in Riverstone Health with the public health and those other areas. And I did 7 years as the chief operating officer there before I was CEO. But when I got there, I didn't know anything about the details. And I think that's a great benefit, because then you have to learn. You can't assume that what you did, the way things worked at a cancer center, is the way it's going to work in public health. You have to learn the public health piece. And I think being open to that learning, but you also have to recognize that you do have your fences. So for me, my line in the sand has always been, you can make mistakes, that's great. You learn from your mistakes. You can even say dumb stuff, that's okay. Don't harm patients. That's my line in the sand. And when people do things that put the people they serve at risk, and whether that is your customers or whether that is the patients in your nursing home or whatever it is, if you're willing to do things to put those people at risk, then I can't work with you. And I think you have to have those guardrails on your decision making. They're not real, in my mind, they're not really tight guardrails. Like they're got to be few and far between, but they're hard and fast.
So this is kind of a segue, and I didn't plan on asking this question, but I think you're probably perfect to delve into this, because I probably will in future podcasts, because I think that, especially in the veteran community, which I'm doing work with and passionate about, when veterans come to employers after service, we're very grounded in values, and our veteran values are 3-dimensional. They're not on a piece of paper that are framed on the wall. So because I know you and I know your organization, I know your values, and you've 3-dimensionalized your values. I think your people articulate your values. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think, people want to know a lot of times, agree with me or not, you can watch an institution from the outside, and you just through turnover and anecdotes from the people that work there, you can pretty much have a at least a basic assessment on what the leadership is and what the values are. And I'll tell you, a military person, if they go into an organization and the value on the wall is integrity, and as the leader, you're screaming across the shop floor that everybody needs to have steel-toed boots on, and you're in Bermuda shorts with sandals, mm-hmm. people start looking for a new job, right. a new place to work and to live. And you have had, and this is probably going to be great for our listeners, you have had incredible retention rates at Riverstone Health, even through COVID. In fact, you were the number one employer in the community probably by the time COVID was over with. Incredible retention rates, and we've talked a little bit about that. So, and you don't have to tie it to values. I think it does. I think it does matter. And from what I've seen you demonstrate, I think you're probably one of the masters of three-dimensionalizing values to the point where not only are you demonstrating them, but people want to be around people that demonstrate them, and then they stay, mm-hmm. regardless of the pay, because you don't have the big, deep checkbook where you can pay people a lot of money. We do not. But you keep people. So if you could talk on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so Riverstone Health has a turnover rate for about the last 7 or 8 years of right around 10%. Healthcare runs about 30 to 40% a year. It did go up during COVID, so the first full year of COVID, we went from 9% to 11%, but still well below the benchmark. And I really believe it's a value-based organization. And as you say, it's one thing to put them on, a beautiful framed picture on the wall. People, if you think about that, every organization has their mission, vision, and values on the wall somewhere. After you walk by it the first few hundred times, it's just white noise, right? You don't even notice it. So one of the things that we do, we have a monthly staff meeting. We've done this for years and years. And the last thing that happens in that staff meeting is a little piece that we call Living the Mission. And Living the Mission is a story. And that story is about someone in our organization or multiple people in our organization whose actions demonstrated our mission. And that's not white noise. People remember stories. Right? That's the power of stories, is people remember them. And none of those stories say, well, good news, last month Susan cured cancer. Right? That's not the story. The stories may be something as simple as, that at a time when people were really struggling, someone stepped up and took some food to a fellow employee's house, or that they did something for a patient or a client that really changed that person's life or day. It's things that people do because they care and they believe in the organization. One of the amazing things of our organization, it's not a huge organization. It's up to 450 employees now, about $63 million a year in revenues. So it's not a huge organization by any means. But back in 2006, we started this program called the Employee Emergency Fund. And the Employee Emergency Fund came out of a recognition that our employees are no different than anyone else. Sometimes they have struggles. We have employees who face the decision of I can get the car fixed or I can pay the rent, but I can't do both. And so we created this system. It's fully run by staff. It's not a management thing. They do fundraisers. So right now we're selling 50-50 tickets, and they do some other stuff during the year. And any employee who has a personal financial crisis can make a request for up to $500 per year and $2,500 per lifetime. And there's only one person who knows who made that request. That's the person that they ask. So there's a really simple little form. So let's just use the example. I can either pay the rent or I can pay to get my car fixed. And if they say, I just need $470 to get my car out of the shop. If that gets approved, and it's a group of employees who only see the story, they don't know the name. If they say, yeah, we can do that, then our finance department cuts a check to the auto shop. They don't, because they don't know who it is either, for $470, and the person gets their car. That seems like a nice little story. Right now, we're up to close to $275,000 that our staff have given to their colleagues. $500 at a time or $150 at a time. We had one employee who had needed really extensive medical procedure and needed $1,000. And the person who was working with that employee figured out the timing was, you're going to get it done early in the calendar year. Why don't you make a request at the end of one year and your second one at the beginning of the next year, and we can get you your $1,000. The $275,000 that they raise, that they give because we care about the people we work with. That's how you live the mission. That's different than saying, yeah, we got this really cool thing on the wall that says our mission, vision, and values are. And I think you have to recognize that. We've done that with some of our boards as well. We run a community health center, which is partially federally funded. There's lots of hoops you jump through and lots of silly stuff that board has to do. And we realized we need to remind them that they're here to do more than check the boxes for the federal grant. And so the last thing that they hear every board meeting, and this is a board that is majority users of the health center, they're patients, is what we call a mission moment. And it's a story that reminds them, this is why you're here. Yes, you have to do the silly stuff and approve things and whatever, but this is really why you're here. This is about the people we serve and the people whose care you govern. And I think you have to tell those stories. When you do that, then people are part of it. Chuck Lauer used to be the publisher of Modern Healthcare. And one of the things that he said is what people really want is to be taken on a journey. They don't want to be told where to go. They want to be a part of the journey. And I think what our organization and many really successful organizations do is they invite people on that journey. Sometimes that means you're going to tell them things they don't want to hear. We've had years where we've been able to give nice pay increases to our staff, and we've had years where we've had zero pay increase. And I do it when I was a CEO. I did every year. I was one that stood up there and said, "This is what's going to happen." People are grown-ups. They understand that not everything works really great, but if you're honest with them, they'll stay. They won't walk away because they can get a nickel an hour somewhere else, because they care about what they're doing and they believe in the organization.
Right. A lot of what you described there, John, is subtle or covert respect, right? Because you're always covering. Because when people feel like there's ambiguity, or ambiguity gets translated into dishonesty, there's something that they're not telling me. And when you're that open, when you say, hey, here's the books, here's the numbers, this is the number. If this was the number, you would get this raise, but we didn't get there, whatever that is, or however that works. And you explain that process to them. I agree with you. I think that's huge. One of the things, when I was in Iraq, because we were the main trauma center for the whole war, for the whole country, everything came there. So there was a lot of things in our beds. Our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardmen, that's the normal traditional thought of what's in our beds. But we also had young children and families and all other victims of war were in our trauma center. And our general at the time, his name was Bert Field, who I still stay in touch with, one of the best leaders I've ever been around. Everybody wants to do a touch and go, right? When there's something like that, everybody wants to touch something. I want to have said I was in Iraq, or not go there for 6, 8, 10, 12 months. They just want to touch and go. And you get a lot of that actually in a combat zone. It's kind of crazy. You get a lot of that. And so he put a stipulation on visiting us. If you're going to come to the base and you want to say, I've been to Iraq and I looked at the airplanes and I watched them fly and they came back without their bombs and, tell a war story. He said, if you come to the base, and this was all comers, all the way up to the vice president, because we hosted him while I was there, you could not come to the base unless you started at the trauma center. And you had to meet myself and the commander, and we walked you through the trauma center. And there was no holds barred. And you had to see what was in the trauma center. And to your point, all of a sudden, it regrounds them on why they're really over there. Oh, I'm a congressman, and I work where the purse strings are for America. Well, let's take you to this spot and get you grounded. So, yeah, good on you for doing that. I know, John, that some of that is you. Some of that is how you feel about people and how you feel about being a leader. But can you tell us? I mean, was there an epiphany? Let's put it this way: everybody will lean in on this podcast when you talk about failure. It's amazing. Even in the book, people call me and they go, "Oh, this chapter is so good," and I'm thinking it almost killed me writing it, because it's about getting cut from a baseball team, or screwing something up in my leadership, or not doing it right. And people so lean in on that. So you got something that you can share in the last couple minutes before we wrap up?
Yeah. So this was back in Cincinnati, and I'm a really low key guy. I don't get very excited about things. I just stay fairly low key. And something happened, and honestly, to this day, I have no idea what the precipitating event was. But I wrote a memo to all the nursing supervisors in the facility. And to be honest, I can be pretty blistering, especially in words, like when I write. And I really let him have it. I was standing up for whatever I was standing up for, and advocate. I don't know what I was doing. And they all threatened to quit. And the next day, there was no more memos. This was stand up in front of them and say, "I'm sorry. We have stuff we need to work on. That was not the way to do it. That's not helpful. I respect what you do," and I truly do. I love nurses. My mom was a nurse, and I've got the greatest respect for nurses. And I handled a situation really poorly. From that, every now and then I do get frustrated enough that I'll write something, but now it's just in my desk drawer. And if 48 hours later I still think it needs to go, I'll probably tone it down and send it. But you have to learn the hard way of, you can hurt people. And as a leader, you can really hurt people. You can help them. You can help them be successful. But one of the challenges of having respect of people is you can hurt them badly. And I don't think I've done anything quite like that since. At least I hope I haven't. But there's been many times I've thought of that experience. And I realized, there is enormous power in having people's respect. And power, it's like the comic books, right? You can use your power for good or power for evil. Right. And it doesn't take much to do a lot of damage. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just close your eyes, close your door, and take a few deep breaths, and go back and find your rock again, start pushing it back up the hill.
Right. Well, John, in my book, Giving Back, the subtitle on there is "Leaders are appointed and anointed only by their peers and followers." You don't get to kind of shake your fist and say, "I'm a leader," and have that be true. And so I anoint you as a peer and a friend and a follower through some pretty crazy times. I anoint you for that. I appreciate you being here. We probably should have you back. When this comes out, for our listening audience, if you want to engage with John, get a hold of me at the website, www.maxfabconsulting.com. Send me a note, say I want to talk to John, or I want to hear from John, and we can do that. We'll definitely have you back when your book is published. It's kind of funny when you said writing a note and then sticking it in a drawer. If you read the book Lincoln on Leadership, he fired all of his generals that way, and he left the notes in the drawer. And they have those notes that he never sent, because he was doing it. He was working on his emotional control and those kind of things. So that's pretty awesome. So John, thanks for being here. And then a last shameless plug. John, you know that I'm one of the founding 4 members of the Apex Leadership Institute. We're passionate people in this community, and we want to offer, people like you to the community to be able to speak and to help our current leaders, even our most senior folks, grow a little bit, because we always have room to grow. And then we want to start growing generations of young leaders that can give back to the community, start giving back to other leaders, and really build a continuum, not only here in Billings and Yellowstone County, but throughout Montana or any place that they'll have us. So on August 18th, we're doing our first conference. We're bringing in Dr. Stephen Long from Colorado, who does prosperity trait stuff for people just like you, to help us grow, and for their staffs. So if you get an opportunity, check it out on the website at maxfabconsulting.com, and find the Apex Leadership Institute, and come and join us. sign up and come and join us and do yourself a favor and grow a little bit, and then bring some people with you that you want to grow. So, John, any last words? If not, thanks so much.
Well, I just want to thank you for the opportunity. I think as I get to the end of my career, I recognize that I know I've learned a lot of things. I've learned a lot of lessons. I'm happy to share them with people. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Again, we don't learn from our successes. We learn from our mistakes. And after 45 years in healthcare, I've got a boatload of them that I'm happy to talk to you about.
Right.
So thank you.
Right. As I write, knowledge is power only when shared, and you live that. So I love it. All right, John, till the next time. I sure appreciate you.
Thank you.